We're probably about a year away, maybe less, maybe more, until the North Koreans have the capability to hit America with a nuclear weapon. After 18 holes of golf, I can tell you this without any hesitation. The President is committed to denying North Korea the ability to hit America with a nuclear weapon. He has made that decision. Does that mean we go to war? No. Does that mean that war is possible? Yes. The decision whether or not there will be a war lies in the hands of the North Koreans and the Chinese.
All right, joining us now, New York Times columnist and a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, Tom Friedman. Very good to have you with us. Joe?
Well, I mean, we've got to look at everything, Tom, that's reported out yesterday from Lindsey Graham, because it's hard to believe anything he says when he says that the president shot a 73 in rainy and windy conditions yesterday, unless he was talking about being on the front nine. Anyway, guarantees from Lindsey Graham about Donald Trump. Actually, a little less assuring after you hear what Donald Trump has been asking Rex Tillerson and James Madison as military leaders from some time, coupled with what he was asking people last year during the campaign about the use of nuclear weapons.
Well, you know, Joe, my friend George Shultz, a former Secretary of State and one of the great statesmen of this country, is a former Marine. And George once told me a story that his first Marine commander, or drill sergeant, when he gave him his gun, his rifle, the first day, he said, "Son, never point this gun at someone unless you plan to shoot it." And what does worry me a little bit, I should say, I do not mind the president, you know, raising the military threat to the North Koreans, even acting a little crazy if it is partnered with some kind of diplomatic initiative that might bring them around. But what does worry me is these sort of you know, very general threats of war that somehow presume the North Koreans are just going to unilaterally, oh God, we're afraid, stand down, unconnected to any other diplomatic process. And so I do worry that he can back himself into a corner where he either has to back down himself in the end, and that would be tremendously embarrassing, or in fact do something that could have vast and unpredictable consequences.
So Tom, from where you sit, what else should the United States be doing? We know they've put some pressure on China's banks and tried to get to North Korea that way. The president's argument is for 25 years we've tried diplomacy, we've tried sanctions to no avail. The only thing they understand is the threat of military force. What else could we be doing?
Well, you know, some problems are insoluble. And sometimes you get a country like North Korea that is, after successive failures of American diplomacy, bipartisan, by the way, and Chinese diplomacy, they reach a level of nuclear capability that we may have to live with. We lived with being under Russian nuclear threat and Chinese nuclear threat. Let's remember when Mao got nuclear weapons, we thought that was the end of the world. And so in a choice between living with that threat and going to war, a war that we're pretty certain would cause the deaths of up to 10 million people and completely disrupt the global economy, frankly, I'm for living with it. There is one thing we know about the North Korean regime. They've been around for 3 generations. How many dynasties in the world can say they've survived 3 generations? What does that tell us? It tells us one big fact. They are not suicidal. They are homicidal, okay? And so I wouldn't, it's nothing you can put, you know, bet the farm on, but at the same time, in a world of uncertainty, I'm ready to live with that uncertainty than the uncertainty of unleashing a nuclear war.
The question is President Trump willing to live with a nuclear North Korea the way you are?
Right.
Well, that's an open question.
Right, and again, part of the diplomacy is here for him to say he isn't. But at the end of the day, I do believe he is surrounded by people who are not ready to pull that trigger.
Go ahead.
Let's assume that North Korea is deterrable, even though they did execute a terrorist strike on foreign soil using weapons of mass destruction within the last 12 months. Right. Let's assume. The risk there then is nuclear proliferation and the possibility of nuclear multipolarity in Asia. Is that containable, and is that a threat that we should be just ignoring and dismissing as something that we have to live with?
Yeah. Again, I think it's a terrible choice. I take that threat very, very seriously. But the only way to contain that threat is obviously working closer with China. but I don't dismiss any of this.
Right.
I think our options are really awful and really terrible.
Does South Korea and Japan nuclearize?
Personally, I think that's the road I would be going down, to saying to the Chinese, you know, look, you guys clearly don't understand the meaning of no. And so maybe one of the things we will do to get your attention is let's nuclear. What do you fear most, China? A nuclear Korea and a nuclear Japan? Well, then we're going to tee that up. I do agree that the Chinese are the key element here. But it is not clear to me, you know, how much influence they have anymore. Because what's the ideal solution? The ideal solution is regime change there that changes the leader, but doesn't dissolve the whole country. That's what everyone's afraid of. And the people who have the best capability to do that are the Chinese. And Kim Jong-un figured that out, which is why he killed the two most pro-Chinese people around him, his uncle and his brother.
What do you make of Bob Corker's statements? We just had a congressman on who just sort of blew them off as doesn't know where they're coming from.
You know, I guess what worries me most, Mika, is the complete and utter incoherence of this Trump foreign policy.
Yeah.
Let's just go down the list, starting with North Korea. You know, that this is a government that wants to take down that regime, all right? But it has no ability to do that. The allies are simply not there. And at the same time, it's looking for negotiations. It's telling the Iranians, we're going to break that deal. So, you know, how do you woo the North Koreans into any kind of arms control deal and you unilaterally break the Iranian deal at a time we know that they're not violating it? On China, this is a government that said we're going to really negotiate with them differently on trade. And the first thing it did was to tear up the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal that would have put us at the head of a 12-nation trading bloc built around our values and our interests that would have given us enormous leverage controlling 40% of the global economy. We're going to tear up the Iran deal and lose all our European allies and have the worst of all worlds.
After putting the money down.
Right, exactly, because our European allies will continue to trade with them, and they won't be under the obligations of the Iran deal. And lastly, we're telling the world, my God, I mean, we cannot live with Iranian influence with the Houthis in Yemen, but our three top intelligence agencies have told us Russia hacked our election, a direct attack on the core electoral process of the United States, and this president couldn't care less. Houthis here, our own elections down here.
Joe.
I want to go back to Bob Corker. It seems to me, if you look at what Bob Corker has said, Tom, and you look at the fact that there's not a single Republican in the Senate that has contradicted Bob Corker and said that Corker's off base, that Donald Trump's erratic actions are not leading us to World War III. You wonder if there's ever going to be a moment like we saw, I think it must have been August 7th or 8th back in 1974, when Barry Goldwater and John Rhodes and Hugh Scott went down to the White House and told Richard Nixon that it was over. Now, we don't need a Republican delegation telling Donald Trump that, but if you have the top-ranking Republican in the United States Senate on Foreign Affairs saying the Commander-in-Chief is leading us towards World War III, should Republicans not put together a delegation and march down to the White House and make certain demands of this erratic president, and then come out and assure the rest of us that Bob Corker is wrong, that Donald Trump is not leading us towards a nuclear showdown and World War III with North Korea?
Joe, I'm all for it. I would like to know exactly what he meant and why he made that statement. You know, and I look at the old Rex Tillerson affair. I mean, I see in Tillerson, I think he's the weakest Secretary of State we've had in the post-war era. He's working for the worst foreign policy president in the post-war era, and I think, in fairness to both of them, at the worst time to be conducting foreign policy in the post-war era. And yet I would say of Tillerson, God, I hope he doesn't leave, because we do know he had the courage to call this guy out as a moron, and we do know at least he has instincts more in line with a sobriety than who knows the next person the president could bring in. I mean, who is going to do that job after Tillerson leaves except some nut I mean, really. So, yeah, Joe, obviously I'd like to know what exactly is behind that Corker statement and why.
All right, after the break, we're going to talk about your latest column on Russia. We'll be right back with much more Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.